Okay, welcome back to another episode of our football podcast, which I guess hasn't been a podcast for a couple months, Uzzi, because we had some internet problems, but we're back for the meantime and the quality will get better. But yeah, it's good to be back. How are you feeling?
Very well, thank you. Humzah, thank you very much for having me back on. It's a pleasure to be on as always, and look forward to discussing this weekend's action.
Yeah, I think it's a good week to be back, isn't it? A lot of action in the Premier League, a lot of consequential games at both ends of the table, or results, I should say, at both ends of the table. But let's start at the top, and let's start with the big three this season so far of Arsenal, City, and Villa. And let's start actually with the Aston Villa game, because you were at that game. You were covering Brentford, and Brentford obviously, putting a dent in Aston Villa's maybe title chances, maybe their top four chances, whatever Emery wants to claim. But they knew Arsenal had won before them and they didn't do the job. So, Uzzi, what happened at that game? Talk us through Brentford's 1-0 win.
Well, I mean, look, an amazing win as far as Brentford's, dare I say, push for Europe goes. Arguably, I mean, for a side that have beaten, Manchester United and Liverpool at home this season, that was probably right up there with regards to, their best wins all season. And why I say that is because before that game, Villa had only lost, I think, twice at home all season. Very, very formidable side at home. And one thing I actually pointed out to Keith Andrews after the game was Brentford were the first team to beat Villa in a league game after they played a Europa League match. So the previous 7 Europa League games they'd won their following league game. And obviously Brentford managed to end that record on Sunday afternoon. And, deservedly so. I mean, an incredible performance, particularly with 10 men as well. It's just a moment of just stupidity from Kevin Schade. But, and thankfully, just before the break, sometimes, whenever you're down to 10 men, particularly just before the half time, sometimes you just keep it around. You just play it around the back. But, one opportunity down, obviously our right-hand side, their left-hand side. And then it was a really good ball down to Ouattara. I think he intended to play it into Thiago for a tap-in, but the cross got blocked, went back to him, just smashed it past Martinez, gave him absolutely no chance. And, obviously, well-deserved going into that. Obviously, they had, it was a very, action-packed first half. Both sides had their fair share of chances. Tammy Abraham was denied 1-on-1 by Queven Kelleher. Konsa had a good chance at the back post, which, he perhaps maybe should have done better with. Ouattara did, actually, before the goal, he went 1-on-1 and he somehow failed to hit the target. Now, it was actually offside in the aftermath, but having seen the replays on our screens, it was very tight. I say it might have been given had he managed to obviously beat the target. Look, an amazing win, and I think the pressure, obviously, particularly of Arsenal, obviously beating Leeds on Saturday afternoon. I think the pressure did get to Villa in that sense, and the fact that you have an extra man, and sometimes when you're at home and the fans are absolutely egging you on to try and get that equaliser, and then if so a winner as well, it can get to you. Like, it can really get to you, and I think it did for those players on Sunday. And I think with Brentford, they just knew that they had to just sit and defend for 45 minutes or 55 if you take in the 10 added minutes. So an incredible defensive effort, something that perhaps that they maybe lacked in recent weeks, months, and years. Just an incredible win, an incredible performance, and a very, very, very well-earned win.
And I've got some stats for you. I know you like your stats. Villa lost back-to-back games for the first time in 2 seasons. You managed to make that happen. And actually, given Villa's, I would say, dominance in that second half, I mean, it's natural. 1-0 down, other team has 10 men. They recorded the highest ever number of passes in a single half since 2003, 2004 in that second half. So I think they did a lot of, obviously they had a lot of the ball, a lot of passes, but it was really just, from what I saw, a bit of slow tempo, predictable sort of build up. And, Brentford defended absolutely brilliantly, very disciplined. drop deep, compact block, narrow lines. And they were happy. I think good thing you were happy to concede possession and just protect those central areas. You're happy for the ball to kind of swing, across Villa's midfield and to their wingers. But, when crosses did come in from the wing, you defended crosses really well, cleared second balls really well. And, you were really a threat going forward. I think that's fair to say in that second half, but that's natural. That's just how it is. It was a classic backs against the wall sort of away performance from you guys, and strengthens your European hopes. And as we said, at this moment in time, Uzzi, is Thomas Frank the manager of the season in the Premier League? Not Thomas Frank, Keith Andrews. Definitely not Thomas Frank.
Well, look, if depending on how Brentford's season ends, whether it be through a European finish or, dare I say, an FA Cup win, which should obviously would get a European place, I think he's certainly up there for sure. Now, of course, that depends on how, as I think we spoke about it a while back. It depends on how other managers do, depending on obviously what happens. If Arsenal win the league, then obviously that puts Arteta in a very strong position to win it. If Villa maybe win a trophy or two, get back into the Champions League, I'm sure Emery can perhaps maybe stake his claim. Dare I say, if Sunderland get into Europe, now maybe Regis Lebris might perhaps maybe feel a little bit aggrieved, or if he wasn't to win. So I think there's a lot between now and certainly the start of February. There'll be plenty of twists and turns to come. Brentford will go through both sides of that. But at the main time, I think for now, you've just got to take it one game at a time. And I think if they were to get into Europe, definitely, I think Keith Andrews can certainly stake his claim at winning manager of the season.
Well, it was a big result for Brentford, and a consequential result at the top of the table, because obviously Arsenal did their job against Leeds, win away from home at Elland Road, and this is a big response from Arsenal after last week's loss against Manchester United. I thought they handled it really professionally, and I wasn't too worried. I know Elland Road can be a bit of a banana skin, but you feel confident with Arsenal against sort of lesser teams, and it felt like a game that we controlled naturally. We weren't spectacular. We didn't need to be spectacular, and it was a classic case of Arsenal when we play against teams now, particularly any team, lower down in the table, they just defend really deeply from the beginning. I know Leeds has a chance, but we face teams that just sit back with a low block, and that's completely fair. And that's why set pieces are so important for us, because it's hard to break down low blocks. It just is. We're not prime Barcelona. Any team really struggles to do that. And that's why set pieces are such a big part of Arsenal's game. That kind of physicality in the box, corners, and putting crosses in. It's a proven way to beat low blocks. Is that we just spoke about Brentford against Villa. You guys had a low block that whole second half, and Villa couldn't get past it. And Villa are no slouch on the attacking side. So, this to me confirms why set pieces are so important to Arsenal, given the nature of our opposition. And it's especially important if we get that early goal in games, and we got that first half goal. So Leeds naturally have to attack a little bit. They didn't really provide too much threat, but 27 minutes in, Zubimendi, heads in from a brilliant Madueke cross, and it just gets me thinking. Madueke, he's not there to really take Saka's place at the right wing position. Even when he's had decent games, Saka's come back into the team. With Saka, getting that injury in the warm-up, Madueke came in, and he was, directly involved in those first two goals with a corner and that sort of in-swinging cross, which he did many times throughout the game. And it's exactly why we signed him. We signed him for credible cover for Saka. Last season, that would have been Nwaneri in that right-wing position, or maybe Martinelli. Neither of those are going to give what Madueke gave in this game. And, Saka's irreplaceable long-term. We know that. We just gave him a huge contract. But to have a player who is, not so much worse, let's put it that way, than Saka, and actually gives a different intensity than Saka is really important. And, this just showed that money actually is very well spent on a young, homegrown winger who, struggled at left wing, but right wing, really, I think for the most part, Arsenal fans would say this has been a good signing this season. So, I really like that from Madueke. And I also really want to give credit to Arteta, because he reshaped the midfield a little bit. He had Rice and Zubimendi a little bit deeper this game, I would say, as more of a double pivot. And then you had Havertz push sort of up with Gyökeres. So Arsenal sort of in possession, they're a bit like a 4-4-2 at times, and replace Havertz, who came in, for this game with Odegaard, who was on the bench. Odegaard drops much deeper and, is not really, other than on the pressing side, doesn't join our striker. So yeah, really, really big win for Arsenal. I don't think we're feeling the pressure at all for Arsenal. It's not the time to feel pressure anyway, not with, you only really feel that with sort of 8 games to go when you reach the 30 game mark. But, it was a good win, and especially compounded with what happened on Sunday night with Manchester City. Uzzi, I know you managed to catch some of the extended highlights because obviously you were coming back from the Villa Man City game. But I want to ask you, is this too extreme to say Man City are out of the title race, or is this just a big blow to them?
I mean, look, I think history's certainly proven that you can't rule them out at pretty much any stage of the season. But I think if Arsenal do go on to win the title, if Pep Guardiola and if they do, Pep Guardiola will probably ask himself, what game was it that our title hopes really, it felt over. It wasn't over, but it felt over. I think he'll refer back to that game against Tottenham. 2-0 up away from home, cruising. Tottenham barely made Donnarumma, work a muscle in the first half. And you think, 2-0 up, good scoreline to go into at halftime. Never take that for granted. You just need to get that third goal and they're done, like they're dead. And then I think it was maybe first 10 minutes of the second half, Tottenham got back into the game at 2-1. And then, okay, the tails were up. And then that's when essentially the momentum was with them. City, I think, were completely, they just ran out of ideas. They could barely string a few passes together. As perhaps we saw, Tottenham looked the more likely winners to go on looked the more likely winners once they got it back to 2-2. Can we rule City out? I mean, look, we alluded to it with Brentford's European hopes and obviously teams around them. It's a long way to go, Humzah. City still have to play Arsenal as well, but it does feel. I mean, particularly when when you're 2-0 up, as I said, when you're 2-0 up, cruising against a side who hadn't really given you much scare, and you still don't come away with 3 points, it does give you that feeling. So, whilst I wouldn't rule them out yet, I still think it's Arsenal's to lose for now.
I agree, and that Man City Arsenal game, until that's played, you can't get comfortable really. So I want to know what Tottenham put in their players' drinks when they play Manchester City, because City just cannot seem to finish Tottenham off ever. They've got one win in their last four games, league games at least. And, I was watching that first half and I thought to myself, we spoke about this, I wouldn't have blamed any Tottenham fan to walk out at halftime because City were just in complete control in that first half. And not even that, Spurs were just flat. They were, produced nothing. They were dominated in midfield off at halftime, and they didn't even look like a proper team, short of confidence, no intensity. And it was just a complete flip in that second half. And yeah, they got that early goal. I would say, I think Frank, I will give credit to Frank in that second half, because at halftime he went from a back 5 that he started the game with to a back 4. And Man City were dominating that first half in terms of possession in that midfield. Rodri and Bernardo Silva were just controlling that game entirely. And they, Tottenham just couldn't press them properly with a back 5. Back 5 is awful for pressing teams. It's absolutely awful. And City's weakness is when you press them, because they're still not necessarily a cohesive unit. It's still a lot of new players. They're still, becoming a proper team, I would say. Tottenham pressed them in that second half, came out aggressive, came out direct. And, Solanke got a scrappy first goal, but that second goal that he scored, I mean, that has got to be one of the best scorpion kicks I've ever seen. I think back to Giroud's one, I think against Palace, many years back, but that was absolutely brilliant. I know it's instinctive. No one scores a scorpion. You can score a scorpion kick by purposely trying it. I think Solanke just sort of lashed his boot out, but still massive credit to him, because that was a brilliant goal to lob it over Donnarumma. And I think it was that extra midfielder that Frank brought on. I think it was maybe Archie Gray, or at least, switching the shape to have an extra body in midfield. I thought that really disrupted City in that second half, and they didn't really adapt. Guardiola didn't adapt his team, which is, quite surprising. And it's becoming a bit of a theme for Manchester City, that second half drop off. I'm noticing they can't really kill games off. And, this is why Arsenal, I don't think, feel too under pressure, because we don't always feel like Man City are going to punish us if we do slip up, and they haven't punished us in recent weeks. I know we've not punished them, you could say, but it's not exactly, we feel like, okay, we dropped a point and they're coming after us. So listen, City lose ground in the title race, 6 points now between them and Arsenal, and, just more breathing room for Arsenal. That's pretty much it. And, it's, on to next week. Let's see what Arsenal do. They got to keep it up. Arsenal could easily slip up, City win, and it's 3 points. And, conversations back on. So I agree with you that you can never write City off. And, especially until the Arsenal-Man City game comes up in a few months' time. Chelsea 3, West Ham 2. West Ham, I mean, what an opportunity for them. We spoke about going 2-0 up, how big that can be, but they absolutely crumbled. I mean, Uzzi, Chelsea were absolutely abysmal in that first half. I think they were also booed off at half-time, and West Ham just dominated Chelsea, especially on that left-hand side, Chelsea's left-hand side with Cucurella. But it was a complete transformation from Chelsea. They made 3 subs at half-time. Obviously, Rossignol was not happy with what he saw. And, Chelsea haven't won a Premier League game after being 2-0 down at half-time. That's a fact for you until now. So how did you see the game? How did Chelsea turn this one around?
As the saying goes, tale of two halves. I mean, West Ham, by far, the better side in the first half, to their opportunities, two very good goals. Well, maybe not the first one. I think maybe the goalkeeper perhaps maybe feel that he could have maybe done a bit better. But the second one from Somerville was really well struck. Of course, gives West Ham a really good advantage at the break. And I don't know if they were aware of that record. I hope for their players' sakes that they weren't. Otherwise, I don't think they'd forgive themselves very much. But look, you saw obviously the quality Chelsea brought on. Obviously, made a few tweaks here and there, and ultimately they got the job done. And when you're fighting for a place in the top 5, I think we can more or less say we'll get Champions League football next season. These are the games that you just have to find a way. And that's what having that extra bit of quality does. I think players players chipping in with such players chipping in at really vital times. Obviously, Joao Pedro scoring, and then I think it was Enzo Fernandez with the winning goal. That's essentially that's what a moment of quality does. It can just turn the game on its head in a matter of minutes. But for West Ham, it was just it was a really, I know you're obviously playing against a side who, are much better than them, but a really big missed opportunity to, put that pressure on, Leeds and Nottingham Forest. Of course, Leeds had that really big loss against Arsenal earlier in the day. Would have been music to their ears going into this. I mean, ultimately, they are where they are for a reason.
Yeah, and that's it. They are where they are for a reason, because when you think of teams who are struggling at the bottom of the table, there are going to be games when they go up. And I look at teams who have a good chance of staying up, that those are teams that when they do go up in games that they don't expect, they stick their, what do you call them, feet in the ground. I don't know if that's the saying, but they really hold on. And West Ham just completely vanished. Like you said, it's a better team, but when the pressure's on, that's when you got to, at least get a point. At least get a point when you're 2-0 up, and Chelsea are playing as bad as they are. I think for Chelsea, listen, they look chaotic as they have throughout the season, in my opinion, but they look, I mean, at least that was a show of kind of like mental toughness, I would say, under Rossignol. So, he will take that from the game, and it's a big momentum shift before the Carabao Cup game against Arsenal. But if I was Rossignol and Chelsea, I would be worried about their 2 new wingers, Garnacho and Gittins, because they just struggled really badly in this game, and I've not really been impressed by them throughout the season, to be honest, so far. I know they're both completely new, so you give them a bit of leeway, but they struggled really badly, and I think both were hooked at half-time, if I'm not mistaken, or both definitely came off pretty early on. But moving on, Liverpool 4-1 Newcastle. Ozzy, did you get to watch this game?
Yeah, I did actually. I think Liverpool obviously could argue were rocked a bit in the first half. Of course, obviously Newcastle took the lead, and then, but they don't know. I mean, but Newcastle were knocking on the door before that. Had some really good opportunities. I think Harvey Barnes hit the post with Alisson beaten, and then obviously they took the lead that their play merited. You know, it was really Gordon didn't have to generate too much power, but it was enough to beat Alisson. But then ultimately, you know, as not to sound too Michael Owen here, goals change games. And and obviously that's what Hugo Ekitike did just before half time. You know, a really good good two goals from him. That second one just before the break, that was just. I saw comparisons with Fernando Torres, and I remember that goal he scored against Chelsea on his Liverpool debut. Not too dissimilar, I must say. The way he took it was like brilliant. You know, just hits it past I think Pope, who it's like it wasn't even there. So you know, really good finish from him, and of course Florian Wirtz with obviously a neat finish in the second half, and of course Kanate on a personal level, good scoring for him. Of course, having lost his father, so of course that would have been good for him to obviously to score a goal to get a goal in front of the Kop end. So you know, of course, a lot to work on for Liverpool. Newcastle still credible opponents in the Champions League playoffs, and of course will definitely be in the mix for Champions League football next season. But you know, good win for Liverpool. But they need to ultimately start going on a run of games where they can, you know, look to get a few wins together and of course cement their place in that top 5.
Absolutely. And one thing I think about is what have Liverpool done with signing these two strikers? What have they done? Because Ekitike for me is Liverpool's, I mean, obviously until the end of the season, he's going to be Liverpool's clear number 9. And him and Wirtz building up chemistry look really good. I think they have 6 goal contributions between them this season, or kind of their link up has resulted in 6 goals, which is the league best in terms of a duo. You know, what are they going to do next season when Isak comes back in? And I imagine Ekitike is going to have a really good end to the season. You know, do you play with 2 strikers? Is one going to be on the bench? You don't want to bench Ekitike, but you don't want to bench your £100 million signing. What do you think they do with these two, you know, world-class strikers?
I think every manager's, you know, does find a way. Whether they play together is obviously one thing, is a completely different thing. I think managers are clever these days. I think they'll find some solutions, but I think Isak knows that, you know, he's going to have to really work hard to get back in. You know, just because you cost, you know, over 120 million doesn't automatically mean that you start every week. And, you know, Ekitike has been absolutely incredible. I mean, to think that obviously Brentford offered him on loan a few years ago, and they turned him down. I don't think I'm ever going to go over that one, but you know, things happen. But you know, such a fine footballer, and when you've got neutrals who you know generally hate watch your team in being absolute awe of you, you know you're a very special footballer.
Absolutely. Let's end talking Manchester United, and the CARRICK train goes on. Man U 3-2 against Fulham. Talk about chaotic endings. You know, it seems like Old Trafford is the place to be right now as a fan, because being in that stadium, that is chaos defined, I would say. And I watched that game and I thought United controlled the game, you know, for the most part, but lacked a little bit of killer instincts. But in general, you go into the 85th minute 2-0 up, you know, that's pretty, you take that pretty much every day. But they completely lost control late on. Fulham equalized, and then Kevin with an absolute wonder goal, you know, for that equalizer. But I think, you know, Sesko, he's just doing what he has to do to silence the critics, is just get goals, and he's been getting goals recently. I look at Carrick, and similar to Arsenal, Man U have been quite set piece heavy this season. I think they have the second most set piece goals in the league, and they face, I think, sometimes the same problem as Arsenal, sometimes some low blocks, and Casemiro stepping up, obviously getting that goal from the set piece. I think Bruno now is on 12 Premier League assists, so that Henry record is firmly in sight for him. But, you know, at the end of the day, United are winning games. That's the most important thing. It doesn't really matter if, at this point, how well they play, yes or no, but, you know, we're in the final kind of second half of the season. They just need to keep winning. That's the most important thing. And, you know, they don't have to be perfect because the teams around them aren't perfect. They're doing the job. And, you know, what did you think of this game?
you summed it up there, chaotic. Old Trafford, it certainly is a place to be at the moment. But, I mean, ultimately, come the end of the season, if you're in that top 5 and you're playing Champions League football come September, you don't really care how you manage to beat Fulham. But, given that United still have some, big games to play still, that they can't really afford to play like they did in that second half. As you said, Fulham with 2 goals, an incredible goal from Kevin, as you mentioned, to make it 2-2. And then obviously Bruno Fernandes, obviously with that really good dummy. But I think Jamie Carragher made a very good point on Super Sunday Extra Time. When that dummy goes through, Calvin Bassey has to brush him off, literally to stop him getting that ball into Šeško. You've just got to wipe him out, take the yellow card, just hold their momentum, right? Don't let them make up more ground. Obviously take nothing away from the finish. It was a really, really good goal. Obviously at that time when you've just conceded, sometimes your head can be in two minds. But it was a really good finish by Šeško. So ultimately, I don't think they'll care too much, but they'll have to play a lot better than they did in that second half, particularly against the Fulham side, who I think just in that. I mean, they are in the top 8, 9, so. They're not a bad team by any means, but at home, you do have to be that a little bit more authoritative, a little bit more assertive. You can't be laying, with respect to Fulham, you can't be letting them get back to 2-2 at Old Trafford. It's this is, you got to be obviously respect them, but you got to take the game to them and just put them away. And obviously, they managed to do that in the end, but they'll have to play a lot better than they did in the second half, particularly when you factor in playing a lot of the other big sides towards the end of the season.
No, absolutely. I'm going to run away and watch Arsenal against Chelsea. Let's see how this game goes. Thank you very much for coming on. And, Wi-Fi issues aside, let's hope that next week we can do the same.
No worries, man. Take care. Thank you for having me.